Hello, my darlings. Mother Raven here with Chapter 5 of Silver Ticket by William Schoene. Finally, we're in a new time period, Deborah said. I gave her a confused look. Attention passengers, we have now arrived in the year 2667. Mr. Hurston announced. Please step off the vessel in an orderly fashion and wait outside for further instructions. Where are we? I asked Deborah. He just said it, she said in an irritating voice. This couldn't be true. There was no way that we had traveled 50 years into the future. As I followed all of the passengers off the bus, I began to have second thoughts about this trip. Everything just seemed wrong. When I got off the bus, my fears were confirmed. Everything wasn't wrong, but just different. I was standing in the middle of downtown Louisville. I was surrounded by newer and taller buildings. Cars and trucks looked smaller than they did in 2017. The cars were small and oval-shaped vehicles with a large window over the top of the vehicle. The strange thing was that there was no exhaust pipes, which led me to believe that they were now running on electricity. Wow, I said. Amazing, isn't it? Matt pointed out. Yeah, but if we're 50 years into the future, that means my parents are... Are what? Asked Matt. Oh my gosh, I uttered, and I ran away from Matt and the group. Hey, come back here! You can't get away from the group! I ignored Matt and kept running until I reached the corner of the block. Before I go further, I want to give some backstory. When I was 14, my parents got a divorce, and my mother chose not to keep custody of me because she wanted to focus more on her job, which was the reason my parents split up in the first place, because my mother was always focusing on work and never made time for my dad and me. 2 years after the divorce, he met my stepmother, and 6 months later, they got married. Now that I have traveled 50 years into the future, I needed to see my parents. I reached for my phone, but realized I didn't have it. I remembered that I had dropped it when Aunt Vicky was shouting at me. I kept walking until I came to a bus stop. I approached a guy that I saw and asked to use his cell phone. He gave it to me to use while saying, "Make it quick," in a firm voice. I got on the internet and found my mother, and I even found my Aunt Vicky's obituary. My mother had passed away due to a heart attack about 2 decades before. I arrived in 2066. I was able to find an entire news article about my Aunt Vicky. The search for 16-year-old Samuel Green has come to a depressing end. After shots were fired in the St. Matthew's home of 62-year-old Victoria Baker, neighbors quickly phoned the police. Witnesses say that they saw Samuel fleeing from the house. The article goes on to say how strange it was that I had just vanished and that my father started a search party that lasted 3 months. What became of Aunt Vicky was that she was locked away in an insane asylum, where she remained until she died at the age of 85. Thoughts of my father ran through my head. He must have been devastated by me being gone. I felt a strong sense of guilt run through me. I thought this was some sort of stupid ride, but instead it was a real trip to the future. I looked up my father's name to see if he was still alive. To my luck, I discovered he was still with us. He was living in a nursing home in St. Matthews. I put the address of the nursing home he was staying at in the GPS on the phone, and how to get there by catching a bus. I was led to a bus stop 6 blocks from where I was currently at, which was 4th Street. I handed the man his phone and started walking. When I made it to the bus stop, I started thinking about my dad. I wondered if he would recognize me. Would he have Alzheimer's or dementia? He must be at least 80 years old or more. The thought of my dad being in that sort of shape destroyed me inside. When the bus came, I was growing more and more nervous by the minute. When I got on, I paid the bus driver a couple of dollars and took a seat near the front of the bus. When I arrived to St. Matthew's, I noticed things looked a lot different. I noticed that the mall was a lot bigger than it was in 2016. It had grown 3 times its original size. This resulted in the demolishing of a lot nearby, businesses and houses that were once surrounding the area. I thought about going inside, but I was out here to see my father. I no longer had a cell phone, but I memorized where the nursing home was located. Fortunately, it was only 3 blocks away from where I was, and after a short walk, I arrived. The nursing home looked like just that, a home. It was a mansion about 5 stories tall, with nice, fresh coat of white paint. When I walked inside, I was greeted by a young woman dressed in scrubs, standing behind a desk typing away at a computer. "Welcome to Shady Oaks Retirement Home. How may I help you?" the woman greeted. "I'm here to see Jackson Green," I said. "He's my dad." The woman gave me a weird look when I mentioned that. I could tell that she thought I was a bit young to have him as my father. Either that or he conceived me at an older age. "Mr. Green is in room 202. It's down the hall," she said, pointing to the hallway to my right. "Up the stairs, and it's the second door to your left." Thanks. When I began walking to my dad's room, I noticed how nice this place looked. The floors were carpeted, and each room looked to be in great shape, judging from what I saw as I walked by. The sad thing was that I knew only people with money were allowed to stay here. As in, these old people must have had kids that were CEOs of big companies. This was confirmed when I made it to the staircase. It was a spiral staircase that looked to have been made up of smooth wood that was well taken care of, and a long red carpet was laid along the staircase. As I walked up the stairs, I saw a young man in a business suit walk down the stairs on his cell phone. I was shot with a very bad thought. What if Dad did a lot better with his life without me? When I made it to his room, I noticed that the door had been left open. Dad was sitting in an armchair watching an old movie. He had a head full of gray hair, and I could see that he was hunched over, even when he was sitting down. He sat focused on the flat screen in front of him, as if it were his entire world. "Hey, Dad," I croaked. My father's eyes widened when he heard me speak. I could tell he hadn't heard those words in a very long time. He turned to me with a stern look on his face. "Dad," he said, confused. "You're not my son," he growled. "It's me, Sam, your son," I explained. "And I'm Elvis. Now get the heck out of here before I call the law." I walked out of the room trying to hold back my tears. My fear was confirmed. He was left senile in a nursing home. I stood there letting the moment sink in. That's when I was approached by a concerned nurse. "What's wrong?" she asked. I didn't realize he was like this, I told her. "Mr. Green hasn't been the same since his son went missing all those years ago." "That's terrible," I replied. "Yeah, the grief affected his marriage and his work performance suffered. I used to go over to his house and try and cheer him up. I'd bring him food and sometimes we'd sit and talk." "That's nice." "Yeah, he's got dementia about 5 years ago, and my family pays for him to stay here." This nurse looked to be older. She must have met my dad not long after I disappeared. I didn't want to leave without at least trying to get him to recognize me, his own son. I walked back into Dad's room. It was sad to see that this is what my father had become. A lonely soul wasting his life away in front of a TV. I began to doubt whether it was worth it to talk to him. But I had to try. He was my father, and I knew that I could never give up on family. "Dad," I called to him. "It's me, Sam, your son." He turned to me, squinting at me with his wrinkled eyes. Then he reached for the small table next to him and grabbed a pair of reading glasses and placed them on his face. "Sam," Dad said, "is it really you?" "It is," I answered tearfully. I was grateful to see that he was now lucid, and he recognized that I was his son. "Oh my gosh," he said, surprised to see me after so many years. I rushed over to him and gave my dad a hug. It felt awkward with him being in a chair, but I knew that this could be the last time I would ever see him. "Why did you run away, son?" Dad asked. "We searched for so long, but couldn't find you." I wondered if I should tell him the truth. Thoughts ran through my head as I began to wonder if that was something my father could handle. "I ran away because I just couldn't take it anymore," I lied. "Aunt Vicky's insane cruelty drove me to run away. I was homeless for months until I was found by a group of people that took me in as one of them." "Oh my," he said out of shock. "At least you're home now." "Home? I'm not home. You're in a—" "What do you mean you're not home?" he snorted. "You came back and now it's all over." My heart sank. I had come to the realization that Dad wasn't lucid. He looked at me again. He gave me a stern look and then began yelling at me. "Get out!" "But I told you to get out of my house, didn't I? Next time I'm calling the law." I walked towards the door, frustrated and sad. Before I left the room, I looked back at my father. He sat in front of that television, lonely and senile. "Goodbye, Dad," I said as I walked out the door. I shut the door behind me and I made my way to the stairwell. As I was leaving the nursing home, I began to wonder about what was to come next. I wondered if there was a way to get back to 2017. Maybe there was a machine like Mr. Hurston's that could take me back to the past instead of taking me to the future. Could I possibly find such a device in this time period? These were all great ideas, but my mind went completely blank when I walked out of the nursing home, only to see Deborah, Matt, and 2 other people waiting for me in the parking lot. "I figured we'd find you here," said Deborah. "Fearful teen boy goes missing after fleeing his abusive aunt," Matt recited. "How did you—" "I figured it was a bit fishy that your aunt just suddenly let you come back to the house. So I did some research on you. Your case reached nationwide news. I mean, there were search parties looking high and low for you. And after it was all over, they put that bitch of an aunt of yours in the nut house for the rest of her life," James added. "James!" Deborah shouted. "That is so disrespectful." "It's fine," I assured. "We were never really that close." "That woman was mentally ill," Deborah acknowledged. "She probably didn't realize what she was doing was wrong." "At the ripe old age of 85, James remarked. "Damn it, James," Deborah snapped, giving him a bitter punch to the shoulder. "So what now?" I asked. "We have to go back to the hotel," Deborah answered. "We have to change into our uniforms." "Uniforms?" I said, somewhat confused. "We have to wear our uniforms for the first day of every new time period," James explained. "It's stupid, but it's Mr. Hurston's orders." "All right," I agreed. "Let's get going. We have to be at the museum in 2 hours." I walked with my new group to an oddly shaped minivan. Its body was the shape of a cube. To me, it looked like a jacked-up version of those buses you see special needs come to school on. The interior of the van looked normal, but the only difference was that there were 5 back seats instead of 2. Deborah drove while Matt rode shotgun. I sat in the back with James and another girl that was in the group. Her name was Sophia, and she was pretty shy. She was 4'11". She had long black hair and a good-sized chest. She was pretty cute, enough that it was a little difficult to make conversation with. For the rest of the ride to the hotel, Sophia and I sat quietly with occasional small talk, while the others had full conversations. It was kind of awkward, but the whole time I felt like a fish out of water. It seemed to me that these kids had been in this program since the beginning, and I was one of the many newcomers. I knew I was going to have to figure out a way to fit in soon, because I didn't want to be the oddball of my group out for so long. When we arrived at the hotel, things got intimidating. When Deborah parked the car, we got out, and I was met with a humongous building. It was the tallest skyscraper I had ever laid eyes on. It made me feel like a tiny figurine in a little kid's playset. The edifice shined brightly in the sunlight, like a newly born diamond. When we walked closer to the hotel, it looked as if it was completely made of glass due to the amount of windows that could be seen. This was also where it received its shine, since the light reflected off all those windows. The hotel lobby had a Hawaiian theme. Potted palm trees could be seen around the lobby, as well as a fountain that contained large orange and red fish. The thing that caught my interest the most was the tiki bar. It was at the farthest end of the lobby, and it fit the scenery perfectly. But the only problem was that it wasn't open. We walked across the front lobby to the elevator. It was one of those glass elevators that allowed you to see a good view of what's around you. Riding the elevator to the top was amazing, because the closer you got to the top floor, the better the view became. The whole ride was like a film that was building up to its epic climax, and that climax was the very top floor. When the elevator stopped, we were on the 51st floor, the very top of the hotel. I was so intrigued by the view because you could literally see all over Louisville, so much that I was able to spot Aunt Vicky's old house in the far distance. My time was cut short when it was time to get off the elevator and go to the hotel room. We walked down a narrow hallway with a red shagged carpet. I thought this was different because I'd never been in a hotel with this kind of carpet before. I thought maybe the hotel got sued because a couple of kids got carpet burns, so they ended up changing the carpet. I knew such an event was unlikely, but I live in a country where an old woman can sue your company because she spilled hot coffee on herself and was not warned that the contents were hot to begin with. Walking into the hotel room was a little bit of a shock. It wasn't your typical hotel room where there were odd paintings on the wall. The room was completely odd for a hotel. The beds had 2 crimson red bed sheets. There were no paintings on the wall, but instead we just had a wall that was painted jet black, so much that it was almost purple. On the wall in front of the beds was a big 64-inch flat-screen television. However, after I took a closer look at the TV, I realized that it was flat as paper, and it was levitating. "This is interesting. The TV's floating in midair," I said. "That's the way of the future," Deborah said, taking off her shirt. "Technology always gets better." "What are you doing?" I asked her. Deborah proceeded to take her pants off in front of me, as if I wasn't even there. I was getting a little bit nervous by this because I'd never seen a girl undress in front of me before. Granted, I'd watched porn before, but that wasn't the same thing as watching a cute blonde girl take her clothes off in front of you. "Am I bothering you?" asked Deborah. No, you're not," I stuttered. "Then why are you staring at me? You need to change into your uniform." She pointed at the green t-shirt and black dress pants on the bed next to me. I proceeded to change into my new uniform, right in front of Deborah. It was weird, but I figured I'd look more out of place if I refused than if I went with the flow. I'd been in the locker rooms before, but they were all full of guys. I was a little bit self-conscious of my body because I was so skinny. I had no muscles or anything, but I knew everyone was in a hurry, so I just swallowed my fear and kept changing. When I was dressed in my new uniform, a t-shirt that read "Southern Academy Road Trip," and a pair of black dress pants, we were ready to go. "So, where are we going?" "To St. Vincent's History Museum," Deborah replied. "It's on 3rd Street." Deborah and I left the hotel room dressed in our new uniforms. As we were making our way to the elevator, I began thinking about the other passengers. I wondered if they had a decent reaction to taking a trip to the future. I was also wondering how or if I was ever going to get back home. I had a lot of questions to ask, but I was afraid of the answer to them. I had to find out sooner or later because not asking these questions was like holding in a great big fart. So I did the honors and asked Deborah one question, because that's how many I felt ready to ask. "Will I ever go back to my time, Deborah?" I asked. Deborah's face dropped. I could see that the answer to such a question had much disappointment. She turned her frowned, misty-eyed face towards me and explained herself. "Unfortunately, I cannot give you an answer to that," she said, pushing the down arrow button to the elevator. "When I joined this group, I figured we would all be able to go back to our own time periods. But Mr. Hurston's time machine only goes forward in time, not backwards." The elevator came to our floor and we stepped outside when the doors opened. "What time period are you from?" I asked. "I joined this trip in 1952, Deborah revealed. "I found the ticket in the back of my brother's Batman comic book. I was the first one to join. When we went to 1975, we recruited Matt. Then came the trip to 1996, where we recruited James and Sophie at the last minute." "Why was it at the last minute?" I asked as we left the elevator. "Sophia and James caught up with us as we were leaving to go to 2016. They flagged the bus down, and Mr. Hurston stopped it and let them get on. He took the tickets, but it turns out they were running from police." "That must have blown the cops' mind, seeing a time machine take off like that," I commented. "But why was it just you guys selling tickets and giving out flyers when I first met you all?" Deborah's cell phone rang. "Yeah," Deborah answered. "Where are you guys?" a voice on the other end shouted. "The tour starts in 5 minutes. It was Mr. Hurston, and he didn't sound happy. "James and Sophia just got here 5 minutes ago, so why aren't you here?" Mr. Hurston demanded. "They took the car while me and Sam were changing, didn't they?" Deborah said, extremely irritated by their actions. Mr. Hurston didn't respond. "I'm getting really tired of their childish nonsense. It's really getting—" "Save it, Deborah," he snapped. "Now stop clowning around and get your butt to the museum." Deborah hung up the phone, almost enraged at what James and Sophia did to us. I could tell that she was ready to beat their butts when she got the chance. Deborah called us a taxi, and we were able to get to the museum and barely catch our group before the tour started. The museum was quite interesting. I was able to learn about how things had changed in the past 50 years. Politics especially are very different in 2066. The country is a lot more socialist than it was back in my day. I feel old saying that. One thing that is a constant debate is that since Quebec just became its own nation, should America recognize it as such, or should we try to take it over and claim it as another state? There's no Republican Party anymore. The two parties are now Democrats and Socialists. To tell the two apart, the Socialists are more like the Liberals today. Schools are no longer big buildings, but they're just small areas where you go to get on a computer every day, to log on an app for 4 hours a day. It's kind of like being in an internet cafe, except without the refreshments. You can pick which subject you want to learn, but you have to pass all the classes to get to the next level. At age 16, you take a career test on what you want to be in life. And after you decide what your career choice is, you take courses that will help you in that field. So you no longer have to take unnecessary classes. Most people graduate college at age 22, with the exception of specialists like doctors graduating at 25 or 30. The most popular form of entertainment is buying immersive experiences in the form of holograph generators. It's piracy and crude, but it still exists, and it's kind of sad. The major problem with the United States in 2066 is that it's getting more poor and militaristic. However, this problem has been getting swept under the rug for years, it seems. The fact of the matter is, nobody will see this until it's too late. When our tour ended, we left the museum and all got on the vessel, which is the name of the time machine. That's when I realized that there were 25 of us on this trip, not counting myself. Deborah, James, Sophia, Mr. Hurston, and Matt. I sat in a seat at the front of the bus and prepared for their takeoff to another time period. But instead we were driven to a restaurant in the heart of downtown Louisville. It was a restaurant that served breakfast, lunch, and dinner 24 hours a day. It wasn't anything small like Waffle House. It was pretty big and popular. I could tell by the atmosphere of the place that it sure as hell wasn't going to be cheap. This place was set up similar to a place like Red Lobster. It was clean and riddled with decorations. It took a while to get us seated, but when we did, our party looked enormous compared to the rest of the customers there. I'd say the second biggest group had about 10 people with them. Instead of human servers, we had robots. There were robot cooks and janitors as well. The only humans around were the customers. I knew that the owners were probably human because robots couldn't possibly own a restaurant. They also had to have someone human to repair the robots when they got damaged. While we ate, Mr. Hurston brought up a very unnerving topic. As most of you know, 3 of our own have panicked and therefore broken away from our group, Mr. Hurston announced. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? I asked. Bad, because they don't need to be staying in this time period. They should be with the group until we find a way to get everyone back to their home periods. You mean to tell us that you don't know how to get us back to our time period? The guy next to me asked. You knew that when you agreed to take this trip, Mr. Hurston remarked. All of a sudden, the other group started yelling and screaming at Mr. Hurston, all because they now knew they couldn't find a way back to the past. That was when I slammed my fist on the table and yelled, Silence! Now, the obvious thing you people failed to think about was that the further we go into the future, the more likely we are to find a backwards time machine, I explained. Is that so? The guy next to me said. It makes the most sense, I replied. The farther in the future we go, the better technology gets, right? The guy next to me gave a promising grin. So why don't we just pack up and go on a time far into the future and find a backwards time machine? We all got out of our seats and began heading for the vessel. Wait, are you all going to finish your food? Mr. Hurston asked. How could you think of food at a time like this? I said. Myself and the rest of the group rushed outside, only to find that the vessel was gone. At first, I was in a small state of denial. I wanted to think that we parked somewhere else, but I knew that the only explanation there was that the time machine was stolen. Why, the flying freak, Mr. Hurston roared. Those crazy sons of bitches made off with my time machine. You mean the people who broke away from the group? James asked. Yeah. Why would they steal the time machine? I asked. I don't know, maybe to leave our asses behind, Mr. Hurston said sarcastically. They could be in the distant future, I said. The vessel only has enough energy for 3 more time jumps into the near future, which is about 50 to 1,000 years, Mr. Hurston explained. The far future would be more likely 10,000 years, and there's no way it can handle that without being fully charged. Do you keep a tracking device or something in case things like this happened? Mr. Hurston gave me a guilty look. Oh, please tell me you didn't leave the tracking device in the bus. Oh, shit, he said, feeling around the pockets of his suit. You're an idiot, James scoffed as he gave Mr. Hurston a provoking shove on the shoulder. I could see that he was just asking for a punch in the face. Why the hell would you leave the damn tracking device on the bus? I forgot, okay? Get off my back, Mr. Hurston snapped. I'm not getting off. Oh, shit, James remarked as he got in Mr. Hurston's face. Of all the things your stupid ass could have forgot, you left the only thing that could save our asses in the bus that might get stolen. All right, that's enough, Deborah declared. Oh, yeah? Well, maybe if you just grow up a little and maybe stop acting stupid for once, you could have reminded me. But no, you've been acting like a stupid little kid. I knew it was a mistake having you on this trip in the first place. Without warning, James slugged Mr. Hurston in the jaw, nearly knocking him down. Before he could charge at him for another strike, I wrapped my arms around him and held him away from our instructor. Mr. Hurston lay on the pavement, clutching his jaw. Calm down, it's not worth it, I told James. He continued to try and break free from my grasp, but he gave up when it was no use. Deborah helped Mr. Hurston to his feet and made sure he was okay from taking such a mighty blow. I then let go of James, trusting that he wasn't going to hurt Mr. Hurston again. We'll find the vessel, Deborah said, but we can't do it with you two trying to kill each other. She's right, James admitted. Now, you two make up so we can all find our way out of this mess, Deborah told them. James and Mr. Hurston shook hands and apologized to each other. After that was settled, Deborah started making trips back and forth from the restaurant to the hotel to get people back to their rooms. We crammed as many people in the car as we could and drove with the car in autopilot. A car driving itself is a perk I miss from this time period. It's safer and it comes in handy if you're drunk or tired. Deborah and I were pretty tired that day, so we just sat back and let the car do all the work. After it was all over, Deborah parked the car in the parking lot of the hotel, and we sat and took a breather. What a day, I sighed. Yeah, tell me about it, she agreed. Do me a favor, reach into the glove compartment and hand me that pack of cigarettes. I opened the glove compartment and gave Deborah her smokes, but I noticed some strange-looking device. It looked similar to one of those old Game Boys from the 90s, but it was smaller and it had a much brighter screen with more controls on the device as well as the screen. What's this? I asked her while grabbing the foreign device. Deborah's eyes widened. That's the extra tracking device for the vessel, Deborah cried. We have to tell Mr. Hurston, I said frantically, reaching for the door to get out. No! Deborah halted. Why not? I demanded. Deborah lit her cigarette and took a light puff. It will stir an uproar, she answered. People want to find the vessel tonight, and I don't feel like dealing with a bunch of rowdy people. True, I agreed. Deborah let the windows down to let the second-hand smoke blow out of the windows. I guess we can deal with this in the morning, I suggested. I started to put the device back into the glove compartment, but that was when Deborah snatched it out of my hands. I'll track the vessel tonight, and we can let everybody know about it tomorrow. Sounds like a plan, I agreed. Deborah proceeded to do her thing with the tracking device with a cigarette in her hand. I sat there for 5 minutes as she continued to track our time machine. When 5 more minutes passed, she told me that it was going to take a while and that I should just go to the hotel room and go to bed. So I went back to the hotel room and laid down, but I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about how I could get back home. I figured if you could go forward in time with no problem, why couldn't you go back? Another thing that was eating away at me was that coding from the meeting, EOT 109. This was supposed to be the end of time, the end of everything that exists. What would happen to us when we got there? The next morning, I was awoken by Deborah letting me know that they were serving breakfast downstairs. I looked at the alarm clock next to me and saw that it was 7:30. I was a tired and groggy mess with the dessert full of crust in my eyes. However, I knew that if I didn't eat breakfast, I wouldn't eat for a while because I knew we'd be tracking that vessel all day. So I got out of bed and got dressed and joined Deborah downstairs for breakfast. "So did you find the vessel?" I asked, diving into my waffle. "Yes, I did," replied Deborah, "but I don't think getting it will be easy." "Why's that?" "The vessel is at a hotel all the way across town, and the people guarding it could be dangerous." "Why on earth could they be dangerous to us?" I asked nervously. "Because these might be the people that we've dealt with in the past. Right before we traveled to 2016, we ran across a group of people that were quite crazy. After they realized that the vessel couldn't go backwards in time, they tried to destroy it and trap us in the year we were currently in. So the only way to get away from them was, of course, to make another time jump. But how? It's not like they waited until they ran across you guys again," I denied. "I always feared that they would come back for us," she shuddered. "These people were insane. They thought they couldn't get home, so they wanted to trap themselves as well as our group in the futuristic time period they are in. I like the future, but I wanted to eventually get home myself. But I wouldn't trap someone here out of frustration. It was madness. If these people are as bad as you say, then we're going to need to act fast, or else 2066 will be our tomb." "Good morning," Mr. Hurston said, sitting down at the table with us. I gave Deborah a nervous look. "We found the time machine," I blurted. "You're lying," Mr. Hurston replied, shocked and dropping his fork on the waffle. "We're serious," Deborah and I said at the same time. Deborah found an extra tracking device in the glove compartment that she forgot about. That's how she found it. "I'll be damned," he said, letting the information sink in. "Where is it?" "It's at the Breckenridge Inn parking lot across town," answered Deborah. "But how do we get it?" I asked. "I have a strategy," Deborah said. "Mr. Hurston installed an automatic feature on the vessel in case we got in trouble and lost the keys. The vessel is a tour bus, so yes, it has an ignition like any other bus. We figured out that they must have gotten into the bus through the windows and started the automatic feature and stolen the vessel. Our plan was to use the same strategy against them, but we have to act fast because they know that we're on to them. So James, Deborah, Mr. Hurston, and I got into the SUV and we raced off to the hotel. I thought it would be a good idea to bring James because he was big. He was as big as a moose, standing a whopping 6'6" and full of muscles. I was amazed he could fit in the car because of his size. So if things went south, I was sure James would be able to handle a few crazy weirdos. When we got to the hotel, the vessel was sitting in the parking lot, just waiting to be taken. The whole thing seemed way too easy. "It's just sitting there," said James. "Let's nab the bitch and get out of here." James tried to get out of the car, but I stopped him when I saw a group of people exit the hotel and walk straight for our time machine. I watched as they all got on the bus, and when I heard it fire up, that's when James and I scrambled out of the car and ran towards the vessel in hopes of retrieving it. "Hey, assholes!" James yelled. "Give us back our time machine!" I laughed a little as I sped up and made a better effort to get to the vessel. I got to the vessel just as they were backing out, so I snatched the door open and jumped inside. Scared the crap out of the driver in the process. I nearly fell out of the bus, but when he put the pedal to the floor and barreled onto the road, I gripped the handrail for dear life in hopes I wouldn't fall out of the bus as we got onto the highway. I breathed a sigh of relief when the door to the vessel slammed shut, making this ride a lot safer. I climbed the small flight of stairs and was greeted with a hard slug to the jaw. I stumbled back a little, but I looked up to see who I was dealing with. This guy was my height and awful skinny, so it seemed like he would be no problem taking on in a fight. So I thought. I hammered him in the mouth and it was on. He came at me with a windmill of fists, 3 of which hit my face, but due to the adrenaline and rage, I was able to ignore the pain and lunge at him. As we fell to the floor, I saw his head hit the sharp corner of one of the passenger seats. When his body hit the floor, he was out cold with a deep gash in the back of his head. I got off of the unconscious opponent and got to my feet. I was met with many looks of hate by the group of thieves. "He's one of Hurston's guests," one of the goons said. "Yeah, I am," I answered, "and I'm not going to let you trap us in this time period." "Is that what he's saying about us these days?" the driver laughed. "Now all we want to do is take this machine and settle down in a good time period. But no, it's all about finding a frickin' backwards-ass time machine. We love the future. That's why we waited so long to get another shot at it. Since you probably just wasted our friend back there, we'll have to kill you." I watched him push a few buttons and put the bus on autopilot. I had never fought multiple people at once. I'd been at fights at school before, but it was never for my life. These people were going to kill me, so I had to stand and fight. This was all or nothing. I ran straight for the driver of the bus and punched him hard in the throat. He gasped fiercely for air as he clenched his neck and fell down. Then I raised my foot up and stomped on his neck, breaking it. I raised my fist up and prepared to fight. The first of my 4 opponents was a girl. She was tough as nails, too. She fought like an MMA fighter. I thought I was going to lose this fight, but she grew tired and let herself open for a lethal uppercut to the nose, sending her nose bone into her brain and killing her instantly. The rest of the goons came to a stop. I could see the fear in their eyes. I had just killed 3 of their friends with my bare hands, and they knew not to mess with me or they'd be next. "One of you had better stop this damn bus," I snapped. One of the goons rushed past me and got behind the wheel of the bus and pulled over to the side of the road. When we stopped, I heard a car door slam. I knew it was Deborah and the others. They were following us while all the commotion was going down. "Sam, are you okay?" Deborah cried as she boarded our retrieved time machine. She was shocked at the sight of what was in front of her. "Oh my gosh," she whizzed. I looked around myself and the whole thing hit me like a brick chucked from an angry ex-girlfriend. I had just murdered 3 people. Many emotions raced through me. I was scared, guilty, and a laundry list of other emotions. Scared because I was afraid of what everyone would think about me. Guilty because I just took those people's lives. They would never get another chance to go to the future, or do anything for that matter. They would rot in the ground as people went on with their lives. I suddenly realized that we had to drop these bodies off and make another time jump, or else we would all be wanted for murder. I sure as hell didn't want to know what a futuristic jail looked like. Hell, I still don't. But that was all the more reason to get the freak out of there. "What in the holy mother of time and space do we do with these bodies?" Deborah asked. Mr. Hurston pulled out a set of metal collars from his pocket and put one on each goon. "Yeah, even the dead ones." "What are you doing?" asked one of them. Before anyone could react, Mr. Hurston pulled out a remote and pressed a button. Within seconds, they all turned to dust. All except for the collars. So close. This Raven.